The great warship of the Valorian Empire hung in the darkness of space like a blade waiting to fall. Commander Thexal stood on the observation deck and watched the blue planet spinning slowly below. Earth. The humans called it Earth. In the old tongue of the Valorian people, the planet had been given a simpler name, Target 7. The orders had come 3 cycles ago from Emperor Malthius himself. The human species was to be brought under imperial control. Their primitive world would become another jewel in the crown of the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. It should have been simple. The humans had only recently discovered faster than light travel. Their weapons were crude. Their ships were slow. By all measures of military strength, they were nothing. Yet Thexal felt something cold moving through his chest as he watched their world. He had read the reports. Every officer in the invasion fleet had been required to study them. The humans called the documents history books. The Valorian Intelligence Service had translated thousands of them. What they contained was unlike anything the Empire had ever encountered. What Thexal had read kept him awake during the sleep cycles. It made him question things he had never questioned before. It made him wonder if perhaps the Empire had made a terrible mistake. The door behind him opened with a soft hiss. His second officer, Krelvan, stepped onto the observation deck. The younger officer's scales had a greenish tint that showed his nervousness. Krelvan was young, but he was smart. He had been reading the human files too. "Commander," Krelvan said, "the troops are asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "They want to know about the humans. They have been reading the history files. Some of them are concerned, more than concerned. I have heard words like worried and frightened." Thexal turned from the window. His own scales were the deep purple of a warrior who had served in 30 campaigns. He had conquered 6 worlds for the Empire. He had never felt fear before an invasion. But the humans were different. Everything about them was different. "What concerns them specifically?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Krelvan's throat made a clicking sound. "The wars, Commander. The humans fight wars unlike any species we have encountered. They fight each other with such determination, such willingness to sacrifice everything. The files describe battles where soldiers walked into certain death, not because they did not understand the danger, but because they considered death preferable to defeat." Thexal nodded slowly. He had read about the human wars. The First World War, they called one of them. Millions of soldiers had thrown themselves into trenches filled with mud and poison gas. They had charged into machine gun fire knowing they would die. They had done this not for days or weeks, but for years. 4 years of unimaginable slaughter, and neither side would surrender. And that was not even their worst war. That was merely the practice round. "The soldiers are asking about Stalingrad," Krelvan continued. "They want to know if the reports are accurate. Some of them do not believe what the files describe. They think there must be errors in the translation." Stalingrad. The name sent a chill through Thexal's body. During one of their internal conflicts, the humans had fought over a single city for months. The battle had killed over 1 million soldiers. The humans had fought in the ruins of buildings, in the sewers beneath the streets, in frozen trenches during their world's cold season. When their ammunition ran out, they fought with knives and shovels and bare hands. Hand-to-hand combat in destroyed buildings, room by room, floor by floor. Neither side would surrender. Neither side would retreat. They fought until there was almost nothing left to fight over, and when it was done, the survivors simply prepared for the next battle. "The reports are accurate," Thexal said quietly. "If anything, they understate the reality." "Then how are we supposed to conquer them?" Krelvan asked. The question was not a challenge, it was genuine confusion. "We have conquered species that outnumbered us. We have conquered species with better technology, but we have never fought anyone like the humans. They seem to enjoy fighting, or at least they refuse to stop." Thexal walked back to the window and looked down at Earth. The planet looked so peaceful from here. White clouds drifted across blue oceans. Green continents spread beneath a golden star. It was beautiful. It was hard to believe that this peaceful-looking world had produced a species capable of such violence. The Imperial strategists believe that humans will surrender once they see the size of our fleet, he said. They believe that humans are rational beings who will choose survival over destruction. They believe this because that is how every other species has responded to our displays of force. Do you believe that, Commander? Thexal thought about what he had read. He thought about a human named Churchill who had told his people they would fight on the beaches, in the fields, in the streets, and in the hills. They would never surrender, not even if the island they lived on burned around them, not even if their empire fell. Never. He thought about Japanese soldiers who had hidden in jungles for decades, refusing to accept that their war was over. He thought about a place called the Alamo, where a small group of humans had fought to the last individual against an army that vastly outnumbered them. No, he admitted, I do not believe that. I think the strategists are wrong. The door opened again. This time it was Vexala, the ship's communications officer. Her scales were nearly white with stress. Whatever news she carried, it was not good. Commander, there is a situation developing in the troop sections. The soldiers have refused morning formation. They are gathered in the main bay and they will not disperse. Thexal and Krelvan exchanged glances. Refusing formation was the beginning of mutiny. In 30 years of service, Thexal had never seen it happen. What are their demands? Thexal asked. They want to speak with you directly. They say they have concerns about the invasion that must be addressed. They say they will not prepare for combat until someone explains how they are supposed to win. Thexal nodded slowly. He had been expecting this. Perhaps he had even been hopping for it. Perhaps his soldiers were braver than he had given them credit for. Tell them I am coming, he said. And Vexala, check with the other ships in the fleet. I suspect we are not the only vessel experiencing this situation. I suspect this is happening everywhere. He walked toward the door, leaving Earth spinning silently behind him. Whatever happened next would change everything. For the first time in his career, Thexal was glad that his soldiers were questioning their orders. It meant they were paying attention. The troop bay of the warship was vast enough to hold 5,000 soldiers. When Thexal entered, he found nearly all of them waiting. They stood in clusters rather than in their usual precise formations. Their weapons were holstered, but the tension in the air was thick enough to taste. These were warriors who had fought alongside each other for years. They trusted each other, and they were scared. Senior warrior Drexel stepped forward. He was an old soldier with scars across his face from a dozen campaigns. He had served the Empire faithfully for 30 years. He had never questioned an order in his life, but his eyes now held something that Thexal had never seen in them before: doubt. Commander, Drexel said, his voice was steady but careful. We have concerns, serious concerns. We request permission to speak freely. I know, Thexal replied. I share many of them. Speak freely. I promise there will be no punishment for anything said here today. A younger soldier pushed forward. His scales were bright with the yellow of barely contained emotion. They expect us to invade a planet of 8 billion beings who would rather die than surrender. 8 billion. Even if we kill 100 of them for every one of us who falls, we will all be dead before we finish. The mathematics do not work. This is not a war we can win. This is a suicide mission. Murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. Soldiers who had never spoken against the Empire nodded their heads. Something fundamental had changed. I have read their history, another soldier called out. When one of their nations invaded another, the people who were invaded did not simply accept defeat. They formed what they called resistance movements. They hid weapons in houses and farms. They attacked from shadows. They blew up supply lines and assassinated officers. They made the occupying force pay for every day of occupation. The invasions lasted for years, sometimes decades. The occupiers never had a moment of peace. And that was against their own kind, someone else added. against beings who looked like them, who spoke similar languages, who shared the same basic culture. They showed some mercy to their own species. How will they fight against us? Against aliens who have come to take their world? They will show us no mercy at all. Thexal raised his hands for silence. The troops quieted, but their eyes remained fixed on him with desperate intensity. They needed answers. They needed hope. They needed someone to tell them they would survive. "Everything you say is true," he told them. "The Imperial strategists have made calculations based on our previous conquests. They believe that all species respond to overwhelming force in the same way. They believe that once resistance becomes clearly hopeless, surrender becomes inevitable. This has always been true before." "But humans are different," Drexel said. "Yes, humans are different. I have studied their history more closely than most. I have spent countless hours reading their books and watching their recorded histories. Let me tell you what I have learned." Thexal began to walk among his soldiers, speaking as he moved. "Humans have a concept they call heroic last stands. Throughout their history, they have celebrated individuals and groups who chose death over surrender. Not because death served any strategic purpose, not because there was any hope of victory, simply because surrender was unacceptable to them. They would rather die standing than live on their knees." He stopped beside a young female soldier whose scales trembled slightly. At a place called Thermopylae, 300 of their warriors held a mountain pass against an army of tens of thousands. They knew they would die. Everyone knew they would die. They fought anyway. When their weapons broke, they fought with their hands. When they could no longer stand, they fought from the ground. Not one of them surrendered. Not one of them tried to run. "That was thousands of years ago," someone said. "Surely they have changed. Surely they have become more civilized." "They have not changed," Thexal replied. "If anything, they have become more determined. Less than 100 years ago, during a conflict they called the Second World War, similar events occurred across their planet. At a place called Bostonia, surrounded human soldiers were offered the chance to surrender. The enemy promised them food, medical care, and safe treatment. Their commander replied with a single word: nuts. They refused to give up even when giving up was the only logical choice." He continued walking through the crowd. In their Pacific Ocean, a single island called Iwo Jima was defended by 20,000 humans. The attacking force knew the defenders could not win. The defenders knew they could not win. Everyone knew how the battle would end. The battle lasted 36 days. Nearly all the defenders died, but they took 7,000 attackers with them and wounded 20,000 more. 20,000 wounded from a force that could not possibly win. The troop bay was completely silent now. Every soldier listened with total attention. "But what strikes me most," Thexal said softly, "is not their behavior in war. It is their behavior after war. When they defeat their enemies, they often rebuild them. They offer aid. They establish trade. They have turned enemies into allies within a single generation. Countries that tried to destroy each other became close partners. This should be impossible, but humans make it possible." "Why would they do that?" Krelvan asked. "Why rebuild an enemy?" "Because they understand something that perhaps we do not. They understand that permanent conquest through force alone is impossible. They understand that cooperation produces better results than domination. They learned this through thousands of years of fighting each other. They paid for this knowledge with rivers of blood." Drexel stepped closer to the commander. "What are you saying, Commander? What should we do?" Thexal looked around at his soldiers. These were beings he had trained with, fought beside, bled with. They trusted him with their lives, and he could not in good conscience lead them to their deaths for a war that could not be won. "I am saying that this invasion will fail. Not might fail, will fail. Even if we take their cities, we will never hold them. Even if we destroy their armies, civilians will take up weapons. Even if we kill millions, billions more will keep fighting. And we will die here, far from our homes, in a war that should never have been started. Every one of us." The young yellow-scaled soldier spoke again. "Then what do? We cannot simply refuse orders. That is treason." Before Thexal could answer, the communications panel on the wall crackled to life. Vexala's voice came through, trembling with emotion. "Commander, I have completed the survey you requested. 17 of the 42 ships in our fleet are reporting similar situations. Soldiers are refusing to prepare for invasion. Officers are questioning orders. 2 ship commanders have placed themselves under arrest rather than lead the attack. This is not just happening on our ship. This is happening everywhere." Thexal felt something shift in his chest. It was the beginning of hope. He was not alone. His soldiers were not alone. Across the fleet, warriors were reaching the same conclusion. "Connect me to the other ship commanders," he said. "All of them. Even the ones still following orders. It is time we talked about what happens next. It is time we made a decision together." He looked at his soldiers one more time. "Wait here. Whatever I decide, I will tell you honestly. You have earned that much. You have earned more than that." As he walked out of the troop bay, Thexal wondered if he was about to commit treason. He wondered if he was about to end his career, his freedom, perhaps his life. But he also knew that he was doing the right thing. The humans had taught him something through their history. Sometimes the bravest thing a soldier could do was refuse to fight. Sometimes saying no was harder than saying yes. The holographic conference room displayed the faces of 41 other ship commanders. Some looked angry. Some looked frightened. A few looked relieved, as if a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Fleet Admiral Zoreth occupied the central position, his ancient face twisted with fury. "This is mutiny," the Admiral declared. His voice crackled with barely controlled rage. "Every officer involved will be executed. Every soldier who refused orders will be sent to the prison mines. I will not tolerate this breach of discipline. This has never happened in the history of the Valorian Empire." Commander Thexal stepped forward. His image was projected to all the ships simultaneously. "With respect, Admiral, you cannot execute 17 ships worth of soldiers. You cannot send 40,000 troops to the prison mines. And you cannot win this war. Those are 3 simple facts." "Silence," Zoreth roared. "I have conquered 100 worlds. I have commanded fleets larger than this one. Do not presume to tell me what I can and cannot do. I have fought battles that would break your spirit." "Have you read the human history files, Admiral? All of them?" "I have no need to read about primitive savages. They will fall like all the others. They will see our ships and they will submit. That is how conquest works." Another commander spoke up. Her name was Velsa and she commanded the warship Eternal Victory. She was known as a brilliant tactician. "Admiral, I have read the files, so have my officers, all of them. The humans are not like any species we have faced before. They are fundamentally different." "They are weak," Zoreth insisted. "Their technology is inferior. Their weapons cannot penetrate our shields. They do not have the numbers to resist us." "Their technology will improve," Thexal said. "That is another thing the files show. Humans advance rapidly during wartime. They become creative under pressure. Within a few years of beginning a major conflict, they double or triple their technological capabilities. They invented atomic weapons in less than 4 years when properly motivated. Give them a decade of war against us, and who knows what they will create. Then we destroy them quickly before they can adapt. We strike hard and fast. 8 billion of them, Admiral, spread across a planet with varied terrain, multiple continents, and thousands of fortified positions. How exactly do you propose to do that? We do not have enough soldiers. We do not have enough weapons. We do not have enough time. The mathematics simply do not work." Commander Krathel, a scarred veteran who had served even longer than Zoreth, spoke carefully. "I was prepared to follow orders, Admiral. I have always followed orders. Loyalty is everything to me. But my soldiers showed me a human document today. They called it a speech. It was given by a human leader named Winston Churchill during their Second World War." "What did this primitive have to say?" Zoreth sneered. Krathel's voice became quiet. He told his people that they would fight on the seas and oceans with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. They would defend their island, whatever the cost might be. They would fight on the beaches, on the landing grounds, in the fields, in the streets, and in the hills. They would never surrender. Never. The conference room fell silent. Even Zoreth seemed affected by the words. The humans were facing an enemy that had conquered most of their continent, Krathel continued. An enemy with superior forces and momentum. By all logical measures, they should have surrendered. Resistance was futile, but instead they made speeches like that one, and they meant every word. They fought, and they won. We are not their historical enemies, Zoreth protested, but some of the certainty had left his voice. No, Thexal agreed. We are worse. We are aliens from beyond their stars come to take their world. How much harder do you think they will fight against us? Against creatures that do not even share their planet. They will fight with everything they have and more. Velsa spoke again. Admiral, I have done calculations, detailed calculations. Even if we achieve complete surprise, even if our weapons are as effective as projected, we will lose approximately 40% of our forces taking the major population centers. That is the optimistic scenario. That is assuming the humans fight the way our models predict, but they will not fight that way. The models are based on previous conquests, Thexal said. Previous conquests of species who knew when to surrender, species who valued survival over everything else. The humans do not think that way. The humans do not surrender, another commander said. My soldiers found records of something called the Vietnam War. A superpower with vastly superior technology invaded a small nation. The invaded people fought back with whatever they had. They used tunnels and traps and ambushes. They attacked and disappeared. They accepted casualties that would have broken any other species. The war lasted 20 years. The superpower eventually withdrew. The small nation won. Superior technology meant nothing. And then there is their nuclear capability, Velsa added quietly. The humans have thousands of nuclear weapons. They have pointed them at each other for decades, in a state of tension they called the Cold War. They were willing to destroy their own civilization rather than let their enemies win. Both sides knew that war meant total destruction, and neither side would back down. Admiral Zoreth's image flickered. For the first time, Thexal saw doubt in the old warrior's eyes. The certainty was crumbling. What are you proposing? Zoreth asked. His voice had lost its commanding edge. He sounded tired. He sounded old. He sounded like a soldier who had finally found a battle he could not win. Thexal stepped forward. I propose that we contact the humans directly, not as conquerors, as representatives of the Empire. We tell them the truth, that we were sent to subjugate them, but we have chosen not to follow those orders. We ask them for peace. The Emperor will have our heads, Zoreth said. Perhaps, but if we proceed with the invasion, we will all die anyway. At least this way we have a chance. And more importantly, we do the right thing. We become better than we were. The right thing, Zoreth laughed bitterly. Since when does the Empire care about the right thing? We conquer. That is what we do. Perhaps it is time we changed, Thexal said quietly. Perhaps the humans can teach us something. They have managed to stop fighting each other long enough to reach for the stars. Despite all their differences, despite their history of violence, they found ways to cooperate. If they can do that, perhaps we can too. The commanders looked at each other across the vast distances of space. One by one they began to nod, first Velsa, then Krathel, then others. Agreement spread through the conference like a wave. Admiral Zoreth was the last. He stood silent for a long moment, his ancient face unreadable. Then he sighed, and the sound was like something breaking inside him, something old and hard and brittle. Very well, he said. May the ancestors forgive us for what we are about to do. Commander Thexal, you will compose the message to the humans. Make it good. Our lives may depend on it. The future of two species may depend on it. Thexal bowed his head. I will not fail you, Admiral, or them. He turned to leave the conference room, his mind already working on the words that might save two species from destroying each other. The humans had taught him something important. Sometimes words were more powerful than weapons. Sarah Chen was on her third cup of coffee when the message arrived. As the senior communications analyst at the United Nations Space Agency, she was used to strange signals from deep space. Most of them turned out to be cosmic noise or equipment glitches. A few had been genuine alien communications, first contact messages from species that turned out to be either primitive or uninterested in further dialogue. Nothing had prepared her for this. This message was different. This message changed everything. Dr. Chen, her assistant called out, voice tight with controlled panic. "You need to see this. Right now, drop everything." Sarah walked to his station, her coffee forgotten. The message filled the screen, already translated by the first contact protocols that humanity had developed over the past decade. The aliens had clearly studied human languages extensively. The translation was nearly perfect. She read the words twice, then a third time. Her hands began to shake. She had to sit down. The message was from something called the Valorian Empire. It explained that a fleet of 42 warships was currently in orbit around Earth. The fleet had been sent to conquer humanity, but the soldiers had refused to fight. The invasion had been canceled before it began. "Get me the Secretary General," Sarah said, "and the Security Council, and every military commander on the planet. This is not a drill. This is first contact, real first contact." Within hours, the message had been verified from multiple sources. Telescopes confirmed the presence of alien vessels. Military satellites tracked their positions. Radar stations around the world painted pictures of ships the size of small mountains hanging in orbit. The entire world held its breath. This was the moment humanity had both dreamed of and feared. The message continued with an extraordinary explanation. The Valorian soldiers had studied human history. They had read about human wars, human resistance movements, human determination. They had concluded that conquering Earth would be impossible, not because humans had superior technology, not because humans were stronger or faster, because humans simply would not stop fighting. Ever. The message ended with a request. The Valorians wanted to talk. They wanted to establish peaceful relations. They wanted to learn from humanity rather than destroy it. They were asking for a chance. Secretary General Maria Santos read the message in stunned silence. Around her, the Security Council erupted into chaos. Some members demanded immediate military action against the alien fleet. Others called for evacuation plans and emergency bunkers. A few suggested that the whole thing might be a trick, a way to get humanity to lower its defenses. "Silence," Santos finally shouted. The room went quiet. "We need to respond to this message. The question is, what do we say? This might be the most important message in human history." The Russian ambassador spoke first. "They admit they came to conquer us. They had 42 warships ready to invade. How can we trust them? How can we believe anything they say?" "They also admit they changed their minds," the Chinese ambassador replied. "That takes courage. That takes honesty. They could have attacked without warning. They chose to send a message instead." "It could be a trap," the American ambassador said. "They could be trying to get us to lower our defenses, make us comfortable, then strike." "What defenses?" Santos asked wearily. "They have 42 warships in orbit, ships larger than anything we have ever built. If they wanted to attack, they would have attacked already. They clearly have the capability to destroy us 10 times over. The fact that they have not done so suggests they are telling the truth." Dr. Chen, who had been brought to the emergency meeting, raised her hand. "May I speak? I have studied this message in detail." Santos nodded. "The message shows remarkable understanding of human psychology and history. Whoever wrote it has studied us carefully. They mention specific events: World War II, the Vietnam War, various historical last stands, Thermopylae, Stalingrad, Iwo Jima. They understand what makes us different from other species they have encountered. They understand us better than we might expect. What makes us different? The British ambassador asked. What did they see? Chen smiled slightly. We do not know when to give up. From their perspective, that is terrifying. They have conquered other worlds by being stronger, by showing overwhelming force. Those tactics do not work on a species that has spent its entire history fighting against impossible odds. We have a long tradition of dying rather than surrendering. They noticed. So our greatest strength, Santos said slowly, is our stubbornness, our refusal to accept defeat. Our determination, our refusal to surrender, our willingness to sacrifice everything for what we believe in. Those qualities have caused us enormous suffering throughout history, wars that lasted for decades, conflicts that killed millions, but those same qualities made us unconquerable to these aliens. They looked at us and realized they could not win, not because we were stronger, but because we would never stop fighting. The room was silent for a long moment. Everyone was thinking about the same thing. The blood and sacrifice of their ancestors had saved them from an alien invasion. All those wars, all that suffering, had created a species that could not be conquered. We should respond, Santos finally said. We should accept their offer to talk, but we should also make something very clear. What? The Russian ambassador asked. That they were right about us. That we would have fought them to the last human being. That we would have burned our own cities, poisoned our own lands, done whatever was necessary to resist, and that we appreciate their choice not to make that necessary. We should thank them for choosing wisdom over violence. The Security Council voted unanimously to send a response. The message was brief but clear. Humanity acknowledged the Valorian communication. Humanity appreciated the courage it took to refuse unjust orders. Humanity was willing to talk. Humanity hoped for peace. But the message also contained a warning. If the Valorians ever changed their minds, if they ever tried to conquer Earth, humanity would resist with everything it had. Not out of hatred, not out of arrogance, simply because that was who humans were. That was what they did. The response ended with a famous quote, one that Commander Thexal would immediately recognize. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. It was a reminder, a promise, a truth about humanity that no one, human or alien, should ever forget. The message was sent into space, carrying the voice of humanity to the stars. 1 year later, Commander Thexal stood on the observation deck of a very different kind of ship. This vessel was not a warship. It was a diplomatic cruiser, built jointly by Valorian engineers and human scientists. Its name, painted in both languages on the hull, was Hope. It was a symbol of everything that had changed. Earth hung below just as it had on that day when everything changed. But now Thexal looked at it with different eyes. He had walked on that blue planet. He had breathed its air. He had met its people. He had eaten their food and listened to their music and learned their stories. They were not the enemies he had expected. They were something far more interesting. The door opened behind him and a familiar figure entered. Dr. Sarah Chen had become the primary human liaison to the Valorian delegation. Over the past months, she and Thexal had spent countless hours together, learning each other's languages, sharing their cultures, trying to build bridges between two very different species. They had become friends. Thinking deep thoughts, she asked, standing beside him at the window. I am thinking about how strange life can be, he replied. 1 year ago, I was preparing to lead an invasion that would have killed millions. Now I am helping to plan a cultural exchange program. The universe has a strange sense of humor. The Emperor was not pleased, Sarah said. It was an understatement. When news of the fleet's refusal reached the imperial capital, the reaction had been explosive. Emperor Malthius had demanded that every soldier involved be executed for treason. He had threatened to send another fleet, one that would follow orders. But something unexpected had happened. Other fleets had begun to question their orders. Other commanders had started reading the human history files. The soldiers' refusal to invade Earth had sparked something across the Empire, a conversation that had been suppressed for centuries. People began to ask questions. Why did they conquer? What did it accomplish? Was there a better way? The news from the capital is interesting, Thexal said. The reform faction is growing stronger every day. There is talk of establishing a council to advise the emperor. Some are even suggesting elections. The word democracy is being whispered in places where it would have been treason to speak it. Sarah smiled. You started a revolution without firing a shot. That is impressive even by human standards. No, humanity started the revolution. We simply recognized what we were seeing. He turned to face her fully. Your people taught us something important. Strength does not come only from weapons and armies. It comes from the spirit, from the refusal to accept injustice, from the willingness to stand up for what is right, even when standing up seems hopeless. That kind of strength cannot be defeated. We learned that lesson the hard way, Sarah said, through centuries of war and suffering, through mistakes that cost millions of lives. And perhaps we can learn it without repeating your mistakes. Perhaps your suffering can have meaning beyond your own history. Thexal looked back at Earth. The human delegates are arriving tomorrow for the treaty signing. I have been asked to give a speech. What will you say? The truth. I will tell them that we came to conquer their world and instead they conquered us. Not with weapons but with their history, with their courage, with their refusal to give up no matter the odds. I will tell them that they taught us how to be better than we were. The next day, the treaty ceremony was held aboard the Hope. Representatives from every human nation attended, along with thousands of Valorian soldiers and officers. The event was broadcast to both worlds simultaneously. Billions watched. History was being made. Secretary General Santos signed on behalf of humanity. Admiral Zoreth, who had aged considerably over the past year but who seemed somehow lighter, signed for the Valorian fleet. The treaty established permanent peace between the two species. It created trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. It was, by any measure, a triumph of diplomacy over destruction, a triumph of words over weapons. Then Commander Thexal stepped forward to give his speech. The room fell silent. 1 year ago, he began, I stood on the bridge of a warship and looked down at Earth. I had orders to invade. I had soldiers ready to fight. I had weapons capable of destroying cities. By every measure the Valorian Empire uses to judge military strength, we should have won. Victory should have been certain. He paused, looking at the assembled humans and Valorians. But we read your history. We learned about your wars, your resistance, your endless determination. We learned about soldiers who charged into certain death rather than surrender, about civilians who picked up weapons and fought against impossible odds, about nations that rebuilt their enemies into allies, about people who refused to give up no matter what. And we realized something important. We could destroy your cities. We could kill millions of your people, but we could never conquer you. Because conquest requires submission, and submission is something you do not understand. It is not in your nature. It is not in your blood. In your history, there is a story about a king who asked a simple question: what is the cost of freedom? Your ancestors answered that question with their lives, over and over again for thousands of years. They died in trenches and on beaches. They died in jungles and deserts. They died defending walls and holding bridges. And every time they died, more of them stood up to take their place. The fire never went out. We saw that spirit in your history and we were afraid, not because you could defeat us in battle, you could not, but because defeating you in battle would have meant nothing. You would have kept fighting, forever, until we were gone or you were. There was no victory against such a people. So we chose a different path. We chose to learn from you instead of destroy you. And in doing so, we discovered something that the Valorian Empire has forgotten. There are some things more important than conquest, more important than power, more important than the glory of empire. Honor, justice, freedom, the right to live without fear. These are the things your ancestors fought for. These are the things you taught us to value. These are the things that make a species great. He raised his hand in the Valorian gesture of respect. Today, we sign a treaty of peace, but more than that, we sign a promise that your example will not be forgotten, a promise that the spirit which made you unconquerable will spread throughout the stars, a promise that we will be worthy of the lesson you taught us. Humanity, you terrified us, and then you inspired us. We came as conquerors and we leave as students. We came with weapons and we leave with wisdom. We came to take your world and you gave us something far more valuable. You gave us hope. You gave us a better future. The audience erupted into applause, human and Valorian voices mixing together in celebration. Sarah Chen wiped tears from her eyes. Even the ancient Admiral Zoreth managed something that looked almost like a smile. It was a moment that would be remembered forever. And above them all, visible through the observation windows, Earth continued to turn. The small blue planet that had stopped an empire, not through force of arms but through force of will, not through weapons but through history, not through strength of body but through strength of spirit. In the years that followed, humans and Valorians would face many challenges together. They would build stations in deep space and explore distant galaxies. They would encounter other species, some friendly and some hostile. They would argue and disagree and sometimes make terrible mistakes. They would learn from each other and grow together. But they would never forget the lesson that had brought them together. The lesson that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle. The lesson that the spirit of freedom could not be conquered by any force in the universe. The lesson that sometimes the bravest thing was to refuse to fight. Humanity had reached for the stars, and when the stars reached back with violence, humanity had refused to yield. That refusal had changed everything. It had saved two species from destroying each other. It had opened a door to a future that neither could have imagined. It was perhaps the most human thing of all, to stand firm when all logic said to surrender, to hope when all evidence said to despair, to find victory not in conquest but in the simple refusal to be conquered. The Empire had declared war on humanity, and their soldiers had refused to fight. It was the beginning of everything.